Welcome to the program today. Mondo Gonzales here in studio, and I have through Skype Graham Keelan all the way from England. And we want to continue our series that we've been doing on really the nation of Israel. And when we think about modern Israel, as it has become a nation in 1948, it's an amazing miracle of history. We know that biblical history and the predictions that we have in the scripture about its restoration. But what we've been trying to do in this series, which has been pretty fascinating, is really to get into some of the history and the ways that God has moved in history through countries and people and situations. And God is in control, and His word will be fulfilled, as we know that He says. But one of the other things that we've been trying to do is to show the ways in which God has acts in history in cycles and patterns, and a lot of things that we see in the biblical text, God brings about in similar ways. So we're going to continue our series in that, but for the moment, just want to remind everybody to join us through live stream in Orlando, Florida. If you have not had an opportunity to check that out, orlandoprophecysummit.com. Again, 18 speakers, lots of excellent topics that we are going to be covering. Again, all of your favorite teachers are going to be there. It's going to be a great time. And so, if you don't have tickets to be there, we want to make an opportunity for you to see it live, as well as over a period of 6 months. It's a great way to do it. I know it's tough for me to sit there when I'm there for long periods of time, but to have the opportunity is great. So check that out, orlandoprophecysummit.com. Also remind everybody that if you've ever wanted to go on a prophecy cruise, we are going to be doing that in August as well, up to Alaska. A beautiful time to be there, prophecywatchers.com. You can check that out. But for now, Graham, welcome all the way from England. Here we are.
Thank you. Good evening from me. Good day to you, Mondo.
Yeah, and we've been covering a lot of things here, and I think we want to cover today's topic, really the way of the patriarchs in two halves, so first half and second half. But in the first half here, let me just say this. In the second half, we want to talk about the Balfour Declaration of 1917. I mean, that's really what people know. We want to get into some of the details on that in the second half. But here in the beginning, if you don't mind, which is helpful for those that might not have been here through all of them, kind of give us a short review of where we've been and then where we want to go in this first half.
Okay, thank you, Mondo. So it's been a long and a slow journey for us, but I think you have to, if you're going to do this properly, you have to really give it the time to sort of take our time to get through the story. But we're now reaching really the crunch moment. A moment now which is going to change the course of the world, quite literally. And of course, when we're talking the Balfour Declaration, it's still being, the effects of that are still being played out today in over 100 years later. So it's taken some centuries now to get here. From the Protestant Reformation, then from the Puritans, then to the evangelicals, and of course the movement which really began in Britain, which sort of gave birth to the Jewish Zionist movement. So we're going to continue this story. I think where we left it last time, we introduced a couple of characters there, the main players: Arthur Balfour, Chaim Weizmann. We had David Ben-Gurion, people should know about him, and then Winston Churchill and David Lloyd George, right? So all those, really just those few players are really going to sort of take this dream forward. And we reached the stage where, the war now is upon us, the Great War, the war to end all war, so they like to say. And 1914 to 1918, terrible war. But in that period, of course, a great geopolitical upheaval is happening across the globe. It is truly a world war, and out of this then comes this dream then that can be realized for a Zionist homeland. And so last time we spoke about how certain places were offered to them: Uganda, being the classic one, because Britain couldn't offer them anything else, So Britain was very much behind the Zionist movement, wanted to create a Zionist homeland for the Jews, but we can't give you Palestine basically. But now they're going to get Palestine in a very few short years from the beginning of the war. So it's interesting. Again, we discussed this idea about the Jews being all over the place, the Zionists being all over the place. They are indeed all over the place because when the Ottomans declared war on the Allies, Britain, France, and Russia, 11th of November 1914, it says that the Jews of Jerusalem welcomed the German units, as because they were going to be the guarantors of their new Zionist dream, right? So very much the Germans are going to protect the Jews from the British is what they were thinking. But during this time, just this guy's interesting. He's called Jamal the Slaughterman. He's ruling Jerusalem at the time, and he's an Ottoman Turk. And yes, it's an ominous sobriquet there. He really was a slaughter man. He's hanging people left, right, and centre because at this time there's an Arab nationalism which is beginning to foment around that time. And of course, the British particularly are trying to sort of stoke the fire on that because they think if the Arabs can rise up against their Ottoman rulers, doesn't matter they're all Muslims, but then they can the fifth column within the Ottoman Empire, basically they can bring the Ottoman Empire down. But so this is, and that's the guy, Lawrence of Arabia. Some people may have heard about him. But anyway, Jamal the Slaughterman. So he's a brutal guy. He's hanging Arabs left, right, and centre. And there's just certain instances. He writes his own laws, and there are certain instances where, he considers them traitors. He doesn't trust the Arabs in Jerusalem at all. And he's basically hanging them outside the Jaffa gates and the Damascus gates. And he does it particularly on a Friday night because as they're coming out for prayers, of course, it gets the maximum viewership. So people are coming out of the prayers and they will be gathering to watch these people being hung. And the Zionists weren't also exempt from that. So Jamal, he suspected the Zionists also of treason. And but again, the guy Ben Gurion, now he's walking around with his fez, and he's actually trying to get Jewish recruits to fight for the Ottomans, right? To fight for them, but he doesn't. This guy Jamal doesn't trust them at all, and he says this to me. He says this to them. Sorry, he says. I've no trust in your loyalty, he says. Had you no conspiratorial designs, you wouldn't have come to live here in this desolate land among Arabs who hate you. We deem Zionists deserving of hanging, but I'm tired of hangings. Instead, we'll disperse you around the Turkish state. So Ben Gurion on that decided to ditch his fez, and he got deported, and he switched his support to the Allies. He thought, well, maybe the Brits can do it for us, So this is kind of how it's going on. And but so it's pretty gruesome. His secret police uncovered a pro-British Jewish spy ring whose members were tortured, their nails ripped out, their skulls squeezed in vices until they cracked and then hanged. But here's another bizarre thing, Mondo. At the same time, Jewish Austrian soldiers fighting for the Central Powers prayed at the Western Wall. So again, it's just this bizarre situation what's going on. It's this idea of blindness, and we're going to get to that when we look at some scriptures about how blind even the Zionists really were to what God is actually doing. But in 1917, after 3 hard years of war, the British are literally at the gates. They're down there in Cairo, and a new commander, Edmund Allenby, he arrives there to prepare and launch an offensive to capture Jerusalem. And of course, the Germans are there defending it. The Ottomans are defending down there in the south. And, there's British airplanes are bombing the Mount of Olives. That's bizarre, isn't it? So this is kind of this is the scene of war. But now what's interesting. So at the same time that Allenby is amassing his invasion force there in Cairo, in London, negotiations had begun to for a new policy, because the British and the French too, but the British particularly understood now that Palestine was in their reach, and they could now actually perhaps realize this Zionist dream that Balfour and Lloyd George had, and then they are driving this dream along with Chaim Weizmann. And so they're at that same time, they're under negotiations of a policy to bring about this Zionist dream. And then as Allenby breaks into Palestine, we're going to get into the discussion now. Lloyd George flamboyantly he declares in his office that he demands the capture of Jerusalem as a Christmas present for the British nation, right? So we're looking now round about the back end of October. I'm going to keep the date a secret for now because it's very interesting. We're going to look at some prophetic history here as well, and I think that's very important to do, get back into the scriptures. So the Battle of Beersheba. So basically what happens is it's mainly British and Anzac forces, so Australian, New Zealand Army Corps. And so there's a lot of cavalry charges in it. So those are the main forces in it. They become known as the Egyptian Expeditionary Force, should I say, the EEF. But they have tried to get into Palestine through Gaza, right? And they were rebuffed on both occasions. Heavy losses, heavy casualties. They just could not break through into Gaza. And then some general had the strange idea then that, well, what if we go through another place? What if we come up through the desert? That had never been done before. No army had ever conquered the Israel throughout its history literally through the Negev. They'd come up through the Sinai along the coastline. That's how the Egyptians did it. Or they came in through the north. That's how the Babylonians, the Assyrians did it. So somebody is now scouting out, and they're actually going to go up through the Negev desert, and it's a famous battle. It's called the Battle of Beersheba, and this becomes a decisive battle, a prophetic battle too in the war. To seize Palestine, and then once they get this, the British then can make a march on Jerusalem, and they get to Jerusalem just really a month later, just 6 weeks later in December, right? So here's what I want us to see. Twice they tried to get in through Gaza. Twice, because of the fighting, they couldn't get in. They come up through Beersheba, and it's actually the Australians, the Anzacs, really, who came in on the eastern side through. It was like a feint, because the Ottomans thought that nobody would ever attack from the eastern side of Beersheba, but they literally did, came in from and it was literally a cavalry charge through the desert, underneath the Ottoman cannon shells. And they took Beersheba. And what's also interesting, I mean, it was taken in a day, and of course, but to do that, of course, they had to secure the water supplies for the horses, for the troops. It was a major effort. It was like 3 months in the planning to do that, So. And what's interesting about this Battle of Beersheba is that you can see a prophetic parallel in the scriptures itself, and that's what I want us to look at. If we got some time here to do that, so we'll have a look at that. So Mondo, if there's something, do you want to add to that?
The only thing I'll say is remind people that to me, I find it interesting that here we are in this modern context, and we're talking about, Gaza has always kind of been more modern, even though it is in the Bible. But, Beersheba is, we're talking about biblical places and biblical names. And yet this strip of land, I think there's a theology here that God intentionally, not only if you look at the geographic location of the land of Israel, being really at the intersection of three major continents, Asia, Europe, and Africa, God did that intentionally. I mean, this is his land. It also has some very climatological things that happen where it's interesting that, when we think about the book of Deuteronomy, we see the ways in which that God is describing the land, and he also is describing it to be a land of faith. It's not like the land of Egypt, where you have the Nile River and it doesn't require a lot of faith. When you come to this land, it requires faith because God will send rain and other things. So in the same way as here we're seeing, again, history kind of repeat itself in that God is working. This is his land, Deuteronomy 11. His eyes are always on it. And so no one's going to be coming in and conquering the land unless God is sovereignly in control. And so by him allowing and bringing in the British here, he's doing it. Again, world empires, I love how he moves. Proverbs 21 verse 1. The heart of the king is in the hand of the Lord. He moves it wherever he wants like a river. And so he's moving and managing world affairs so that the British will take control. So, let's go in through this way. Well, isn't that interesting? So I think just for people to see that this is not an accident of history. Some theologians, Graham, you know this, where they're like, the fact that Israel is just in one of many nations today, not a big deal, nothing prophetically significant, nothing to see here, move along. It's like, that is so far from reality of even a normal theology of God's providence. And so as we get into some of the details, just remind people that, to me, this is encouraging, that we're approaching the end of the age where all things are going in the direction that God wants it to go for his son Jesus to return. And the establishment of the nation of Israel and all these things going on is just another testimony to that fact.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we set out to do this series, we don't just want to do history. We wanted to do prophetic history and theological history as well. And when we get to the end of this little section here, we're going to find out that we're going to realize that no one can pull this together. Nobody has sat there with the Bible thinking we're going to do this because of something prophetic in the scriptures. The British are going through Beersheba because it seems to be it's the most ludicrous way to go into Palestine, but then it's never been done before. But then we can't keep getting our faces kicked in going up through Gaza. We'll never get into Palestine. So from them, it's a purely military tactic. But from God, there's something here prophetic. So Beersheba, or Beersheba, as it's somehow pronounced in the original language, but we'll go with Beersheba. So that's the southernmost part of the land of Israel. So the term from Dan to Beersheba, because when Abraham comes in to the land of Israel, the land of Canaan, he comes from the north, right? And so the north will eventually become the territory of Dan. It wasn't originally, but so when the Israelites are thinking about this and they're writing about this, they have this expression from Dan to Beersheba. And so you'll find that Abraham went all the way then down from Dan. He traveled through Shechem, and it says he continued down to the Negev, down to the south. And so Beersheba is the southernmost part of the patriarchal route, which is why we've called this the way of the patriarchs, right? So, and it's also interesting that there at Beersheba is that it's called the Well of Oath. That's the actual name, or the Well of Seven. So Abraham, remember, he's having problems with the king there, Abimelech. And, in the land of the Philistines, it's all the land of the Philistines there. And he gives them 7 ewes. They're contesting wells because water is really hard to come by there in the desert, as the British found out when they were trying to invade. So it's contested by the herdsmen of Abimelech. And so Abraham establishes an oath, right? And in one sense, then, he gives him 7 ewes. So lambs. So in other words, there's a way then that this land is being bought by the blood of the lambs. These wells are being bought by the blood of the lambs. Just a slight note there. The other one who had who was living there was Isaac, right? So God is confirming his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So he also had trouble with the Philistine herdsman when he camped and dug wells, and you'll find that story in Genesis chapter 26, and basically he's digging wells round about the Gaza district. And Isaac digs a well there. The Philistines come out and say, the water is ours. They're contesting that. So he calls the name of the well Esek, which means contention, right? Because they contended with him. I'm reading Genesis 26:17, thereabouts. Then they dug another well and they quarreled over that also. So he called that its name Sitna. And that Sitna means strife. It means to oppose. It means Satan. It means accusation. All right. So Isaac is really is struggling to find a place where he can actually just tend his cattle and look after his family, right? His fledgling family. And he moved from there, then moved further east, and he dug another well, and they didn't quarrel over that. So he called its name Rehoboth, which means to enlarge and to widen. And here's what it's saying, Mondo. It's saying, for now the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful from the land. So he goes up from there and he goes to Beersheba, and the Lord appears to him in Beersheba in the same night and said, I am the God of Abraham your father. Fear not, for I am with you and will bless you and multiply your offspring for my servant Abraham's sake. So he builds an altar, and then Isaac's servants there dig another well. Okay, and then Abimelech, then he comes to Isaac and he says, okay, look, sorry about all the trouble we've been doing. Let's have another oath together, like I made with your father. They make a feast together. They exchanged another oath. And on the same day, then in Beersheba, they discover another well, and they call it Sheba, which means oath. Therefore, the name of the city is Beersheba to this day. So the city itself has a covenant oath marker to it. Do you understand it? There's something about God appearing to the patriarchs there in Beersheba, and the same happens with Jacob. So interestingly, Isaac is told to stay in the land, but Jacob is actually told to leave the land at Beersheba, right? So we go on here. So Israel took his journey. Now I'm down here in Genesis 46, and he had and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God of his father Abraham or Isaac. And God spoke to Israel in visions in the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, here am I. Then he said, I am the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I'll make unto you a great nation. I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also bring you up again, and Joseph's hand shall close your eyes. So Jacob sets out from Beersheba into the land of Egypt, and what's happening here is it's the promise, because God has promised Abraham that you'll be in Egypt, your people will be in Egypt for 400 years, or they'll certainly be persecuted for 400 years, and they will be released after 400 years. And again, that becomes very significant, but we can't get into that prophecy. But so what's going on here, Mondo, is that you have something happening at Beersheba. So the way of the patriarchs is Abraham comes in from the top. There is a tradition that's where Abraham received he made the covenant. One tradition has Abraham cuts that covenant right at the top, right by Hermon, as you're coming in. So that's why you have this Dan to Beersheba thing, you know. So the way the patriarch Abraham begins in Dan, he goes all the way to Beersheba, and here now his seed leave the land of Israel at the bottom end, right? He came in at the top end. They leave at the bottom end to be there into the land, into a foreign land, there into Egypt. And so there's something here about the way the patriarchs, which is why we called this one the way the patriarchs, where we have some prophetic fulfillment, because this is exactly what, in one sense, what the British had to do, was they came back up from Egypt through Beersheba, right? And with them, they're bringing something else. So don't forget, they're in they've tried to get into Gaza twice. They can't because of the strife and the contention and the opposition and, the denial. And this is our land, this is not your land, right? But the British, in one sense, they're fighting for the Zionist cause, right? So they're fighting to reestablish the children of Israel in the land of Israel. So, but not only that, there's something really interesting. I mentioned that the day that Allenby goes into Jerusalem, it goes into to Beersheba to capture it. That very same day, there is a meeting going on in Downing Street in the cabinet. And they are now, after months of negotiation, they are now finalizing the Balfour Declaration, and they are voting on it. The very same time, about the 6 o'clock, the very same time those Anzac forces captured Beersheba, because Allenby was actually going to tell them, I need to capture it by nightfall, because there was just no way to communicate. But the Australian general who was in charge of his forces there, he just thought, you know what, I'm going in. He went just before lunchtime. He mounted his troops and said, we're going in. So by the time of 6 o'clock, they got it. They captured Beersheba. At the same time, the British War Cabinet has declared the declaration. They have voted on the declaration, right? And they have agreed the declaration, because the date that we have on the declaration is November the 2nd, 1917. That's just when the letter was written. The declaration was confirmed on the very same day. Do you know what day that might have been? 31st of October, 1917. So where have we heard that? Where have we heard that day before? From the Reformation. The very Reformation Day. So it seems like what's happening here, when Martin Luther is nailing his thesis to the door of the Wittenberg Church, right, to declare the Protestant Reformation, which is the beginnings, as we have now found out, the beginnings of the Restorationist movement. The voice is heard to return the Jews. Exactly 400 years later to the day, the British government is metaphorically nailing a document to Downing Street door, declaring the Zionist dream, declaring the declaration that this land will now be given to the children of Israel. And it's at Beersheba then where he makes that, the well, he says, because here he says he will make room for us. He has made room for us. And so what that battle does, or what that declaration does, Mondo, it makes room for the children of Israel to once again, after 400 years of Ottoman rule, because they are turfed out, after 400 years, to fulfill another prophecy, to go back to the land of their forefathers, to look for a city whose builder and maker is God.
Let's just stop here for a minute. I mean, the fact of the matter is, I've looked at a lot of modern Israel history and everything, but I never knew this, and so to see the power to the exact day and for their ancient history, that the idea of almost, again, what we were talking about earlier, these patterns, that at the very spot, God was working through the British to make room for the people of Israel to go back into the land to fulfill his promises. I mean, these are the things, it's like, reading in the book of Ruth, she just happened to come upon the field of Boaz. There's no happening here. Yeah. There's no happenstance. What an amazing testimony.
And it's just, and again, it's just it can't be a self-fulfilling prophecy. Allenby is not there looking at the Bible, and neither is Lloyd George. Well, he is actually towards the end. We'll get into another story there, but they're not studying the scriptures that way. They're just being moved by history. So something, from Jacob leaving the land of Israel in that prophetic, I'm going to Egypt. Now his people being led back from Egypt under the British banner, and they're at the city of the oaths, at the city of the wells, and it's obvious that the British, the expeditionary force there, were actually using the same water supplies that the patriarchs had been fighting over what, 4,000, 4,000 years before, right? 2000 BC. So this is just, and God's like, yeah, this has been 4 days for me.
Exactly.
And we're like, this is, so again, it's just that idea of prophetic history. So I wanted to finish that our first part then, Mondo, on looking at Jeremiah 30:31, and just go through here quickly, because again, I want us to see something here. And I'm just going to pick out some scriptures and read quickly. Is Jeremiah talking about the restoration for Israel and Judah? And of course, Israel's long gone with Jeremiah, right? It's not talking about the restoration of Judah, because that's the people he's dealt with. Israel's been dispersed, 150 years earlier, around about 720 BC. So, there's a prophecy here for Israel and Judah. So I'm picking up verse 30. So just verse 3, and I'll just call out the verses, Mondo, as I'm reading this. For behold, days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will restore the fortunes of my people, Israel and Judah, says the Lord, and I will bring them back to the land that I gave to their fathers, and they shall take possession of it. These are the words that the Lord spoke concerning Israel and Judah. Go on down to verse 8, and I will burst your bonds, and foreigners shall make a servant of him, but they shall serve the Lord their God and David their king, whom I will raise up for them. Verse 10, for behold, I will save you from far away, and your offspring from the land of their captivity. Jacob shall return and have quiet and ease, and none shall make him afraid. Verse 17, for I restore health to you, and your wounds I will heal, declares the Lord, because they have called you an outcast. Now, I mean, that's true, right? They were outcasts from the land, and they were outcasts from the nations. Because they called you an outcast, it is Zion for whom no one cares. Zion is Jerusalem. It's not the land. Zion is a city. Thus says the Lord, behold, I will restore the fortunes of the tents of Jacob. Let's go on down here to verse 21. Their prince shall be one of themselves. Their ruler shall come out from their midst. I will make him draw near, and he shall approach me. For who would dare of himself to approach me? So that's very messianic. Let's go on to chapter 31. I have loved you. Verse 2, I have loved you with an everlasting love. Therefore, I have continued my faithfulness to you. Again, I will build you, and you shall be built, O Virgin Israel. He's talking to the people. And you shall adorn yourself with tambourines. Verse 6, arise, let us go up to Zion, to the Lord our God. Verse 7, listen to this. For thus says the Lord, sing aloud with gladness for Jacob, and raise shouts for the chief of the nations. Proclaim, give praise, and say, O Lord, save your people, the remnant of Israel. Another translation there says, and shout among the chief of the nations. Who was the chief of the nations? That's who for the last couple of hundred years, who was calling out to Lord, save your people, the remnant of Israel. So there's a way we could say that Israel is the chief of the nations, but I think here is talking about it's raising the shouts among the chief of the nations. Of course, Great Britain is the chief of the nations at that time. It is the one who is driving this thing to bring the Jews back to their land. Behold, and here's what they say, behold, I will bring them from the north country, says the Lord, and gather them from the farthest parts of the earth. Among them the blind and the lame, the pregnant woman, and she who is in labor together. Verse 9, he who scattered Israel will gather him and will keep him as a shepherd keeps his flock. For the Lord has ransomed Jacob. He has redeemed him from the hands too strong for him. They shall come and sing aloud on the height of Zion, and they shall be radiant over the goodness of the earth. Now go here to verse 21, really key. It says here, set up road markers for yourself. Make yourself guideposts. Consider well the highway, the road by which you went. Return, O Virgin Israel, return to these your cities. So again, that whole idea of Israel being taken out through the way of the patriarchs and coming back through the road markers, through the guideposts, the prophetic guideposts, the highway of the patriarchs. And there we are talking about Beersheba all the way then to Jerusalem. And it has a slightly different thing there in Isaiah you could look at. But it says here where it says, also, Mondo, it says that among them the blind and the lame. In the Isaiah reference, I think it's Isaiah 43, he talks about the blind who who have eyes and the deaf who have ears. So again, it's another confirmation of it's what Jesus said when he talks about you have eyes that cannot see and ears that cannot hear. In other words, God is going to bring back the blind even though they have eyes, and the deaf even though they do not see. So they're going to come back in their blindness and in their deafness, waiting for those eyes and those ears to be opened. And so I'll leave that section here on that if you wanted to say something about that.
Just remind people that the reason that the British were doing this is because of the Word of God. I mean, going all the way back, as we've been discussing, their history, going back, as you mentioned, to the time of the Protestant Reformation early by Luther, but then making its way very quickly up to the British Isles. And it's that heritage of, again, as we talk often here, reading the Scripture, straightforward, literal, grammatical, understanding the prophetic passages that are talking about a restoration. Of course, we talked about the Restoration Movement, but this trend, this ethos that you have of the British Empire going all the way back, because in reality they could be like, well, why do we care about Jerusalem? We don't need to care about Jerusalem. Let's just come home. Why waste one soldier there? Now, granted, there's other geopolitical considerations for sure, but one of them certainly was religious, and that's the important thing.
Yes. So I think on the next part of our discussion, then we should discuss the Balfour Declaration itself.
Yeah, and this really, people hear about the Balfour Declaration, and we've been talking about the religious side, but this is important because, remember, not you, but for those that are watching, is that Israel today, and Israel as it was looking for its restoration, going to the early Zionist movement with Herzl, they've been looking for some level of international legitimacy, legal right to be in the land. And this is one of the foundational official empire building, in the sense from a world empire, providing legal status of someone who had the authority, again, as a world empire. It'd be one thing if Argentina said, well, we want to promote a people in the land. Well, who cares what Argentina says? Nothing against them. They just didn't have the clout. But today, even today, modern Israel goes back to looking at the international legitimacy of this declaration, which we want to get to now.
Yeah, so Mondo, you're right there, because basically what this declaration, Britain couldn't do this by itself, although it's the world power, it's the leading power in the world at the time. It still needed the agreement from its allies, France, Italy, the United States, and so they were all in agreement with this idea of the Jews being returned to Palestine, and so. But what this declaration is, first off, is just a declaration of intent by a British government. It has no legal grounds. So it's issued November. It's issued November the 2nd, 1917. Everybody knows about that famous letter to Lord Rothschild, and then it's only in 1919 at the Paris peace treaty, after the war, they're divvying up the land. Then it goes to the San Remo conference in 1920, where it's now adopted. It actually becomes a legal document, this is a creation of the West, by the way. It's a creation of Christendom, the state of Israel, and then it goes to 1922, and it goes to the League of Nations, and then it gets adopted as a mandate. So. Into the mandate policy, so it does become a legal document, but it's unfortunate in that basically what happened. There's a guy called Mark Sykes. So Chaim Weizmann is outside the cabinet offices, waiting for this deliberation. So don't forget, this is 31st of October, 1917. Allenby's charging through. His forces are charging through Beersheba, and a guy called Mark Sykes. He comes out and he declares to Weizmann, it's a boy. right? So in other words, we've just given birth to, this child of this of Zionism, right? So that's the expression he used. But unfortunately, though, this boy, we'll use that, continue with the metaphor. He's going to grow up to be a very unruly son. It's going to cause a whole lot of problems. And it's going to cause problems for all concerned. Really, the British, the Arabs, the Jews, and even to this day, it kind of sows the seeds for the problems. But I don't know if you know this. Well, you do, because I sent you the stuff. But it's actually, this was not the original wording of the Balfour Declaration. Is that the original wording is what the British government were going to allow, give to the Zionists. And here's the original draft, right, approved by Lloyd George and Balfour. This is around about July in 1917. It says this: His Majesty's government accept the principle that Palestine should be reconstituted as the national home of the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to secure the achievement of this object, then will be ready to consider any suggestions on the subject which the Zionist organization may desire to lay before them. Right? I mean, look at that. We'll consider any suggestions which the Zionist organization may desire to lay before them. Nothing there about the existing rights of the existing population. Not, I mean, it would already been commented that Balfour probably wasn't concerned with the 700,000 Arabs living in there. That it was, So what would the British have done if this original thing had got passed? Would they have moved them out? We don't know. But it seems like it wasn't a particular problem. But the biggest opposition for this declaration, it came from the anti-Zionist Jews. It's so again.
Let's just first of all, let's define that, who that is, and let's stop right here for a moment, because this is super powerful in looking at the history of the whole movement, that one of the biggest objectors was anti-Zionist Jews. Now, who are they?
So we have this idea of the assimilated Jews. So they're the Jews who have made good for themselves in the Western nations, because Zionism is really driven by the Russian Jews, through the pogroms, and they're trying to get out and go somewhere safe. But, German Jews, French Jews, British Jews, even American Jews, they're all kind of like, they've made good. And so, no, we don't fancy the desert. Thank you very much, So, we've worked hard to get our positions in these societies, and they're what's called assimilated Jews. They're assimilated into their cultures. And so, therefore, why would we want to give this up? And So Zionism split the Jewish, not the Jewish movement, split the Jewish community, right? So you had the pro-Zionists, and then you had the anti-Zionist Jews, So and the Rothschilds were split. There was some Rothschilds were for it and some were against it, and most of them considered the whole enterprise just madness, basically. They just thought, this is just nuts. Let's just stay where we're at, because why give up our position? So it was a fully assimilated British Jew, written to the cabinet in 1915, that Zionism has always seemed to me to be a mischievous political creed, untenable by any patriotic citizen of the United Kingdom. There is not a Jewish nation. I deny that Palestine is today associated with the Jews, or properly to be regarded as a fit place for them to live in. So this is a Jew in the cabinet, and in the British cabinet. And of course, this is where the argument is happening, So they kind of like, okay, anything that the Zionist organization wants to suggest, we'll take it on board, and we'll try and we'll secure what you're looking for. But it was the other Jews who said, nah, sorry, we're not going to have this. So another guy, Lord Curzon, he was like, say, well, what's going to happen to the other? He wasn't a Jew, but what's going to happen to the inhabitants of the land? And of course, like I said, I don't think Balfour was necessarily thinking too much about that.
But here's what Lloyd George later on, Mondo, he says, the chiefest trouble was a raging controversy with the anti-Zionist Jews, fueled in the cabinet by the Secretary for India, Edwin Montagu, and aired in the press by Alexander and Montefiore, President and Secretary of the Jewish Board of Deputies. In those days, the majority of respectable Jews were still regarded Zionism as a mad delusion of an army of beggars and cranks. A recreated homeland seemed to them not the fulfillment of a dream, but the undermining of their hard-won citizenship in the Western countries. That was Lloyd George. So it's not like the Gentiles were like, yeah, we're up for this, so let's go for it. And so Weizmann then is having now to combat the Jewish voices, the Rothschilds. He's trying to win them over. So, but the end of this is that the declaration gets butchered to quite a degree, and it gets compromised to quite a degree. Weizmann always wondered about whether he should have held out for the original, something more secure. But he felt like it was, if he didn't take it, it would be denied. But when we're saying that the Jews have been all at sea on this, they simply have been, and they're still all at sea on this. Some of them don't want to go back, because you had the cultural Jews, you had the political Jews. Oh, sorry, you had the political Zionists, you had the assimilated Jews. So you had all these competing voices, and so in the end, what the declaration ends up being then is this fudge. It still achieves certain things, but it creates massive problems over the decades. It says this: His Majesty's government view with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. So there's no more the national home. And those who have been responsible for getting all these amendments are quite proud of their achievements, that they had to go on record to say we're glad we got it changed. So of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors. The original draft said, well, to secure it, right? But it just said now it will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. It being clearly understood, and here's what was added, that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. In other words, we're now not going to lose our rights because of Palestine, because now. So this is kind of what went on for 3 months. But in the end, this is the declaration that the Zionists went with, they accepted, and we'll look, I think, in the next session, Mondo, about the problems that it caused, in the 20s. It wasn't all bad in the 20s, but certainly, with Arabs then, because the British had problems with the Jews and with the Arabs, because, hey, you said this, but it's just an important thing there is that, because a lot of people think, the British were kind of holding out on the Jews, and they were being perfidious, and they were, and if it's anything, they were being a little perfidious with the Arabs, with the Arab nationalists. But here they were like, no, we'll do it for you. We'll secure the achievement. Tell us what you want. And then a big fight within the Jewish body erupted, and this is what we got in the end. But there's one thing I want to finish off with. And just to say, one character I would just want to introduce in the far off horizon. But did you want to say anything to that, just to close that a little bit out? And then
I think about it seems very ironic that Satan certainly wouldn't want the reestablishment of the nation of Israel, because he knows the scripture. And yet he used and influenced many people to oppose it. But to see that he would be able to work through anti-Zionist Jews, to me is just, again, the irony is there that the very people, the very ethnic descendants of the promises of God would seek to thwart it. It reminds you of, to me it reminds me of anyway, is when they came out of Egypt and they had a little difficulty, And they wanted to go back to Egypt. Oh, in Egypt we had the leeks and we had the onions and the melons and everything else. And so in the same way, you see these people who had, again, they had come to the place where they had a good life. And why would we want to go move to the desert? And I could see, though, like you mentioned, is, well, imagine the tide of political things turning and saying, well, we don't have to give you any rights. If you want any rights, we have a land for you. Go there. And so I could see the fear, which is understandable because of the history over the last couple thousand years of persecution and expulsion in many, many countries. But, again, God's will is going to be done. And as we know, the rest is history. But there is the details that are there.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're talking about, we'll touch more, I think, on the declaration in the next one, because but in one sense, just to introduce somebody else who's now going to figure quite devastatingly upon the Jewish nation, the Jewish people, and really, it's going, because the declaration itself is going to be exploited, because the document, because it becomes legal now, Britain can't do whatever it wants to do. In one sense, its hands are going to be tied. It's going to be switching between Jews and Arabs, trying to keep them both happy, and we will have the whole immigration problem. But so I've said that the declaration goes from a British declaration, then into the San Remo Conference, 1920, gets adopted into international law. Then it goes into the League of Nations. It gets adopted into the mandate system. 1922, right? But in the same year, Mondo, 1922, that the League of Nations was seeking now to impose this new order on the world, that a war would never happen again. A portentous omen, right? The size of a man's hand begins to appear on a distant horizon, right? So it's like I liken it to a dark, ominous fist. That would grow to have a devastating impact on the Jews and indeed the world. So a disgruntled and embittered young army officer in the German army, and is now the newly crowned leader of the Workers' Party. He gives an interview to a journalist called Joseph Hell. That's his aptly named. He'd already written his first comment on the Jewish question in September 1919, and he described the Jews as a race tuberculosis of the peoples, and the ultimate goal must definitely be the removal of the Jews. But in this interview with Hell, he tells Hell, once I am really in power, my first and foremost task will be the annihilation of the Jews. As soon as I have the power to do so, I will have gallows built in rows at the Marienplatz in Munich, for example, as many as traffic allows. Then the Jews will be hanged indiscriminately, and they will remain hanging until they stink. They will hang there as long as the principles of hygiene permit. As soon as they have been untied, the next batch will be strung up, and so on down the line, until the last Jew in Munich has been exterminated. Other cities will follow suit, precisely in this fashion, until all Germany has been completely cleansed of Jews. And there's no guessing for who's saying that. That is Adolf Hitler. So a dark note to end this session on. But I think as we look then to the 20s and the 30s, where we know this is going, and all the, in one sense, the messing around with the declaration itself will have devastating impact upon Jews all across Europe.
Yeah. As we wrap up these little details, and yet here you have, the enemy bringing Adolf Hitler in to thwart this. And again, if there's no Jews left, there can't be a nation. But yet, as we know, even in Old Testament history, every time Satan, went to get rid of the seed, the seed of David, God was always one step ahead and his purposes would be accomplished. And so again, at the end of the day, when we look at this history, which I think is fascinating, we see God's hand. That's why we're studying this, is prophetically we know, but we're also seeing the majestic hand of God throughout history, currently, but also in the 20th century, early 20th century, in seeing his people come back. He's bringing them back. He's bringing them back for a reason. And because why? The end of the age is here. And he's bringing them back in order to accomplish. We're on the last scene especially now, as you said, we're 100 years later, even removed from that, and the nation of Israel is that much more mature. And here we are, the problem hasn't ceased, because the problem will be there. Desolations are determined until the 70 weeks of Daniel are fulfilled when Jesus returns.
Amen.
So appreciate you watching today, Graham. As always, thanks for being here. And join us next time. Again, we're going to continue to get into this and see the way that God's hand is working. And to me, I hope that it encourages your faith, because I know it encourages mine. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.